started this podcast with the idea that we were going to talk about sign stealing, and that didn't become enough of a thing for an episode, so kind of pivoted over to the unwritten rules, which includes sign stealing.
Right. Not so much sign stealing is an unwritten rule, but rather sign stealing is sort of against the unwritten rules depending on the situation, which is sort of the problem with the unwritten rules.
And so when I started doing some research on the sign stealing thing, and I came up with a post written by our friend Jeff Kalman, who writes the great Thornberry Fields blog, and Jeff was talking about a Paul Dixon book, and I love Paul Dixon because he wrote the Bill Veeck biography I just finished, and he wrote about all kinds of the signs and stealing signs and the Astrogate and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And one of the things Jeff did in his post was that Major League Baseball today sends an 8-second delay. They didn't used to have that, obviously, so it made stealing signs a little easier when you didn't have a delay.
You could just pick up the actual in-time broadcast, and now you've got that delay. You can't relay the signal in time anymore.
And they've got people in the clubhouse that are making sure that people aren't trying to use what's on that to signal back up to the field.
Or you can't use any of your own internal cameras and networks to broadcast something and get your own signal to do that.
Or trash cans either, but let's not talk about that.
Well, right. I mean, not being able to see the signs helps with the trash cans, but I mean, I think unwritten rules are fine up to a point. And I think part of the problem is the unwritten rules that mostly have to do with the decorum of the game I'm okay with, because a lot of those I feel like come from lower levels of baseball, and it's about respecting your opponent. Don't show your opponent up. So that's where things like, you don't swing on a 3-0 pitch when you're up by a certain amount come from. And,
which is that's almost going by the wayside, because there are some teams that can come back from 8-10 runs down.
And also, it's very different when you're looking at younger players and amateur players with that rule, where everybody's playing for the fun of the sport and because we're trying to get better. And then when you have professionals who have actual monetary incentives attached to their performance, I would be annoyed if I came up with guys on base and I wasn't allowed to swing the bat on a good 3-0 pitch because, I'm not supposed to.
That Tony La Russa got into trouble with that with Juan Moncada a few years ago, right, when he was managing the White Sox, and Moncada hit a 3-0 pitch in a rout and for a grand slam home run, and that didn't make Tony very happy, and then Tony wasn't very happy because they didn't like that he wasn't very happy.
They picked Juan Moncada over him.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the sign stealing stuff, when it went back to this has been going on for years. Doing things from the scoreboard, I think, was where you kind of begin to cross the line.
Right. I think when you have people that are outside the game relaying information back into the game, that's when it's a problem.
Sometimes, though, it was a player on the team who was in the scoreboard flashing signs to his teammates.
But that's not. I don't have a problem with if you have a series of complicated signs that the second guy on second base can relay to the hitter to let him know what pitch is coming, and he picked it up and figured it out, that's fine. That's on the field. That's between the players.
And it's up to the catcher to disguise those signs.
And that's no different than pulling a good hidden ball trick on a runner. But when you've got a guy out in your bullpen with a pair of binoculars peering in, now I'm starting to have a problem with that. Or hiding in the scoreboard with the pair of binoculars.
So one of the most famous plays in baseball history is the Bobby Thompson home run against the Dodgers in the 1951 playoffs. And for years, people have been saying that Thompson was signaled, and the Giants, who made a big comeback that year, have been doing this all season long from the scoreboard, and that Bobby Thompson, who denied it, that he ever knew what was going on, that he was going to get a fastball from Ralph Branca and hit the most famous home run.
That sounds like a lot of cope from
Yeah. And there are some players who don't want to know, that's for sure. Even if they could know, they don't want to know.
They're like, I don't need it. It messes me up to know what it is. I'm just trying to react on instinct.
And so the catchers have to respond, and Yogi Berra is apparently really good at this in terms of disguising their signals so that the runner on second base in particular, can't steal the sign, which is legit, right? If you can pick up a catcher's signs and get it to your hitter.
I feel like the Astro scandal has so warped what people look at cheating in baseball as, because I feel like sign stealing is such a low percentage of what people are actually doing when it comes to breaking, both written and unwritten rules in baseball.
Yeah, and I think that I didn't realize how long it had been going on, having this kind of scoreboard oriented.
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
It went through the 60s into the 70s, and teams were doing this stuff with varying levels of success. And just because you steal the sign doesn't mean the guy's going to hit the ball because he knows what's coming. So I think it gets a little bit, like you said, a little overwrought. According to the unwritten rules of baseball, stealing the signs that are given by the third base coach or the catcher by a base runner on second base is acceptable. Okay, so
right, which is what we've been saying, that if it's a guy in the game, there isn't an issue with it.
But pitchers will retaliate if they think you're stealing the sign.
And this is kind of also where it goes back to, this is why the unwritten rules are stupid, because now there's stipulations and clauses to these unwritten rules. So it's like, oh, not only you're allowed to steal the signs, but that also means the guy can throw at you.
Right, which we on this podcast
we're against. So I'm not going to suddenly be supportive of it because, well, okay, he earned it.
But the National League banned the use of mechanical devices in 1961. So they were aware that people were doing this stuff.
And people have always
1961.
Well, people have always been trying to cheat, and that's what a lot of these unwritten rules were about. We're sort of trying to come up with the gentleman's code for cheating in baseball. What was allowed.
Do it the right way.
Right.
Cheat the right way.
Cheat the right way. That's what this is about.
And you see what happens now, which is very different, I think, in baseball, is when you go to the mound, you have a mound conversation because there's cameras all over the mound, and the pitcher's talking to the catcher or the coach always has the glove in front of his face.
Right, because that's somewhere where if you're talking about the strategy of how you're going to approach an at-bat, an 8-second delay isn't going to help you. You can relay that information.
But lip reading is immediate.
But what I'm saying is you might have an 8-second delay on those cameras, but you could figure out what they're saying and relay it in time. It's not like a pitch sign.
And just an aside, so I thought, so what other sports is sign stealing part of the equation?
I think sign stealing, I think you see play stealing in football, but that's more through direct theft of playbooks and videotaping things that you shouldn't be, like practices and stuff. I don't think there's as much like basket. You've never really heard of. I mean, the Knicks accused the Raptors of stealing their plays this offseason.
But not sign stealing in the flow of a game.
Right. It doesn't happen in the flow of a game in other sports, but that's because there really aren't signs that you're communicating.
Well, there are actually in football. I think that it does happen. You've seen some of the weird things where they have like the graphic to call a play, which is some bizarre graphic that only the players on the
but
team
you only
know.
get that in college. In the pros, you don't get that because the quarterback's wearing
right.
a headset and he's just getting it piped in, so he doesn't need any kind of complicated sideline shenaniganery.
I guess you could, let's talk about the word chicanery in a sec, because chicanery is a good word about cheating, right? Chicanery is a nice way of saying you're not doing the right thing here, but we're going to call it chicanery, so it's okay,
right?
And so the head coaches in football, though, if you watch them carefully, sometimes you might be able to pick up what the play is, but how are you going to get that and relay it down to a defense or an offense
and that's
in
where
time
a lot
to have
of
it
the
be
times
effective.
that people draw the line with cheating is when it's like it's not so much that they've used some outside mean to get the sign, but then you've used yet another outside mean to relay that information. You know, baseball isn't like football. You can't tap a guy on the sideline to go run in and feed the info into the team on a substitution. You're going to have to pipe it in some way, and usually that's, some kind of very, banging on trash cans kind of way.
So the MLB writer Anthony Castrovince wrote a great article in 2020 on the unwritten rules. And so we're going to thank him because he kind of listed out a bunch of them that we'll talk about, which I think are really interesting. And what he didn't include, one of them, is he didn't don't call your shot. Right, you can't be Babe Ruth in the 1932 World Series and port to center field and go, I'm going to hit a home run there.
Supposedly. But I think that's also because just it's a monumentally stupid thing for a hitter to do.
Yeah, if he didn't hit that home run, the next one was in his ear.
Right. Well, even if he didn't, I mean, you're most likely not going to. So it just makes you look bad, which is why I think it's less an unwritten rule and more just something no one's ever going to do with any kind of sense.
So you talked about already swinging at the 3-0 pitch, right? In a route also, right? So and actually there's not a rule that says you can't hit against any 3-0 pitch. That's okay.
It's about you don't steal or swing at 3-0 pitches or run up the score when ahead by a large margin.
And it used to be don't run up the score at the away team's ballpark. Okay, so let's say you're playing,
Right. And that seems like something that comes down from ownership.
Don't embarrass us in front of our fans.
Right, no, but that's something you're telling them because you don't want that done to you. So, because if you're a team that runs up the score on people in their ballparks, then people are going to do that to you. And being a team that gets a run up on in your own ballpark is not good.
And so how do you feel about that? I mean,
It's something that I don't think really exists anymore, so it's not something I feel particularly passionate about. I think teams generally, they back off on the gas, not because like, oh, any kind of, it's the unwritten rule, and just because like, well, we're up 12 and they're not going to score 12 to, catch up, so let's rest our guys and not throw anybody important.
You remember in Little League they have the rule where if you're up by 10 runs, it's a run rule. We don't need run rules in the major leagues.
And you had that in Little League because, you actually would hurt some of those kids' feelings. These are professional ball players. They can handle being down 10 runs.
And I think they even had run rules in the World Baseball Classic, like in the early rounds.
But that's to protect. That's both to protect. That's more to protect international fans, and so that to protect the sanctity of sort of the tournament, because it doesn't look good if there's some game where like the U.S.
29-1,
right? The U.S. beats some team that doesn't really play baseball by some obscene margin.
So it's here's another one. After a pitcher has given up back-to-back home runs, don't swing at the first pitch.
That I don't think exists anymore.
like what? So
right. That doesn't exist anymore.
Because that goes back to showing up as if it's in some way of showing up the opponent.
Right. If he's giving up back-to-back homes, you better be swinging at that first pitch if it's in there.
It'd be like if a hockey player was out there, right, and he scores 2 goals.
Don't shoot.
Like miss the net on your next shot. Don't shoot on the goalie.
Don't show the goalie up. Yeah.
So I don't think that has much.
But then, if you notice that if you look at a lot of those rules, they all sort of come from the same idea of not showing up your opponent, and I think that that's not nearly as much of a concern these days. I think there was the idea that baseball is a game is looked at differently. We get that it's a game now. We get that in the grand scheme of things, it's not that important. Nobody's honor is being besmirched.
What are you saying?
Nobody's livelihood is being ruined or endangered because the Mets got beaten by the Phillies by 10 runs on a Tuesday afternoon.
That reminds me of back in the 80s when Boris Becker was winning Grand Slams in tennis. I guess he got upset in the first round of some tournament, and so he gets to he's always a pretty good quote, even though he's a weird dude. And he says, I lost a tennis match. Nobody died. Right? No one's going to go into to cry about this. I said, just let it go. It's really not that important. It's just a tennis match. And at that time, it was like, oh, how can you say something like that?
Right. Whereas I think Giannis Antetokounmpo said something similar to that after they fell out. They got knocked out of the playoffs last season.
I have other things in my life other than
like I'm not that worried that I didn't win the championship. This
should
year.
mean everything. You should bleed for it. No,
it's fine. So I think that's where a lot of that comes from. Whereas, you have the flip side of that rule where don't show up your fielders, which is a bit of a pitcher-specific.
This is something you would know very well.
Right, because I was not good at it.
You were not. No, this was one. I remember when you were pitching all that kind of stuff, and you pitched one game, and you pitched a great game, and it was like near the end of the game, and one of your fielders made an error, and the visible displeasure that you showed in that thing was like, oh man, that's not. And you were a kid, you're in high school, you're upset,
right?
And I was like, but that is an unwritten rule in baseball that the guy drops and pitchers do it today. They still do it today, right? Because like that, somebody makes an error and Garrett Cole's on the mound. I'm looking at him going, he's not very happy right now.
And there's sometimes
rolling his eyes.
You understand. There and also the difference is, like the errors in the major leagues, like you don't have errors like you do in high school baseball in the major leagues. Like I don't watch a fly ball hit directly at somebody in the major leagues just somehow not get caught.
So I guess we were talking about throwing at hitters, and we talked with Mark Stevens, the author of Fireballer, and one of the premises in his great book was that he's a big believer that you don't throw
and something we've talked about is eventually we're afraid that somebody is going to get hit with a pitch and unfortunately die from it. And that's why we're so against throwing at hitters as a conventional retaliation, because it puts everybody involved in a bad situation. And I get that it's frustrating that as a team you can feel like there's no way for us to strike back at a perceived injustice in a game, but we really have to ask ourselves, why do we need to strike back at a perceived injustice in a game?
And with guys, as we talked about with Mark, his hypothetical pitcher, his character threw 110 miles an hour. So getting hit with a 110-mile-an-hour pitch, that has the potential to be deadly.
Well, I always think about, we talked about it on that podcast. Well, Noah Syndergaard threw behind the Dodgers guys after that because he didn't want to hit somebody because he knew if he did, he'd be suspended for so long because he throws so hard.
And just imagine if you're in a game and you're pitching and you've got, I don't know, a no-hitter and it's
Right.
the 7th inning and they hit one of your guys and
If
he
it's
gets
a no-hitter,
injured.
you're okay.
Okay, so you got to go out there and go like, okay, do I have to throw at this guy to make, no, because I have a no-hitter, I'm okay.
Right, yeah.
But if I had a one-hitter, I should hit him?
Yeah. Or it depends if it's close and where it is in the season. If you're only up 1-0 and it's like the 8th inning, your team's probably going to understand if you don't put the first guy on in a given inning. But if it's 7-0 and he's up 3rd in the inning and there's 2 outs, they're probably going to expect you to hit him, and that's the problem.
Yeah. And this is one that Anthony talked about. Pitchers relieved mid-inning must stay in the dugout until the end of the inning. That's old, right? I don't think that happens.
That's a very old school way of looking at it. I understand the thought process of it because it kind of comes from the idea that you're not supposed to be
It's not about you.
It's not about you. Going into the dugout before the end of the inning after you've been relieved. One, I think that rule came from a time where it was much more unusual for guys to get relieved for.
And to leave the dugout. It's not like they had a big clubhouse to go to.
Right. Nowadays, if you have a guys get pulled all the time, so it's not going to be nearly as weird. And a lot of guys will leave the dugout for a few minutes to go get their wrap on and get, finished for the game.
Sometimes they might take a bat to the water cooler or something like that just to show how upset they are about how it went bad. That display of emotion.
Right, but
like,
them going back to the dugout is much more about them getting treatment and, fixed up before the end of the game than, showing their displeasure at being taken out.
And he's another old school one, right? Don't step on the pitcher's mound if you're the opposing player.
No. Don't step on your mound if you're anybody. Stay the frick away from my mound. Like, why are you stepping on it? I just got it the way I like it. It doesn't help that the other bozo on the other team is messing it up with every pitch he throws.
So you ground out the shortstop, you run down the first, you make your circle. Okay, you're in the third base dugout. You kind of run back to the other dugout and you run over the back of the pitcher's mound. Could you imagine?
I mean, one, I'm on the so it's just weird in general because the only time you can kind of do that if it's the last out of an inning, because if you crossed over the mound,
well, the pitcher's already gone though.
Well, what I'm saying is if there's less than that, if I'm still on the mound and you crossed over the mound, that's just weird at that point because you'd have to go out of your way to go over the mound, I feel like.
And how about don't walk in front of the catcher? What does that even mean? Like you walk behind the catcher from the on deck, so don't walk in front of him.
Yeah, no, nobody's respecting that anymore.
Like who's even doing that? The jinx of talking about a no hitter. I think that's not an unwritten rule. That's just a superstition.
Right?
It's not really an unwritten rule, but it used to be much more held that.
Well, there is an unwritten rule in regards to no hitters, and that's you don't break up a no hitter with a bunt.
Yes.
So I think that's like you don't not talking about a no hitter progress is more of just trying to respect the jinx because you don't want to be the guy that said, "Wow, you've got a no hitter through 7 innings," and then he immediately gives one up the next inning. That's just about covering your own ass.
We did our deep dive on the Yankees in the previous episode, and what I didn't mention in that was during Don Larson's perfect game in 1956. Apparently, after each inning, he sat on one end of the bench, and Yogi Berra sat at the other end. They never talked to each other the entire game until until the game was over and Yogi jumped into his
that sounds like
he didn't know.
Yankee romanticism.
Yogi basically said, "I didn't want to mess with anything. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to give me any encouragement. I didn't want to give him anything. He was just pitching, and I was just catching, basically. And I just didn't want to jinx it at all by having that conversation. You're not buying that.
I'm not buying it."
So, and how about here's one that used to talk about this. Tim McCarver, when he was doing his great color announcing for the Mets and other teams, you never make the first out or the third out at third base.
Well, I think that's less of an unwritten rule and more of a strategy thing. I feel like unwritten rules are more about the comport of the game than the actual strategy of it, because I can understand the rationale, because making the first or the third out at third base, either one of those is implying that you could, assuming you could have stayed at second base safely, that you're able to score safely. But if you make the second out at third, well, okay, I can understand that because getting to third with one out allows you to score on a sac fly. So I think those are less unwritten rules and more just, trying to come up with good strategy for the game.
That goes alongside, which wasn't one that Anthony Castrovince wrote about, which is don't ever get thrown out stealing third. Like, if you steal third, you have to make it.
That doesn't make any sense.
By Ricky Henderson, by the way, stole third like a million
I think
times.
You should steal third base
it was
more often.
Easier to steal third a lot of times, particularly when the pitcher's back is to you,
right?
And can't even see how far your lead is.
Well, there's a couple things that make stealing third way easier. One, the fielder can't as easily just stand on second base like the first baseman can sit on first base. So it's much easier to get a big jump and steal cleanly. And if you're able to get good jumps off of second base and steal it cleanly, I think getting to third is so much more important than getting to second.
Like I said, Ricky made an art of that, and doing it with a right-handed batter at the plate, as opposed to stealing second. Where
That's an awkward throw. I think people do not appreciate how awkward of a throw is for the catcher to make, because for a right-handed catcher, it's not like throwing behind a left-handed hitter to go to first base,
right,
where your arm is naturally already behind him. You have to throw across your body to get the ball around the right-handed batter, but not throw it too much across your body to the left-hand side, because the fielder still has to catch the ball and bring it to the other side of the bag. So it is not an easy throw to make. The easier throw would be to get behind the right-handed batter and throw up the line like that, but that's not easy to do on a snap throw.
And I remember when you were playing youth baseball, you had a coach, and he was really good at teaching you guys pickoff plays. And you were, 14 or 15. And I remember you telling me he had like 16 different plays. And of course, trying to pick off kids is a lot easier because they're not as savvy or whatnot. And you can trick them pretty easily.
But you can fool kids with motion, like getting a fielder goes one way, a fielder goes a different way, and you get the kid leaning on timing. And it's much easier to catch kids leaning the wrong way.
And then there was the don't use your closer in a tie game on the road.
Well, that's gone.
Well, and I think because right now the closer pitch is not even necessarily at the end of the game. He might pitch sometimes in even the seventh inning, much less the eighth inning, depending on situationally.
Right. That is a rule that has been thoroughly obliterated.
Right, and there was a period of time though that the closer was this sacrosanct,
which is a weird thing. When it went from a thing that didn't exist to this thing where you never use the closer.
He only pitched the one inning.
Right.
I guess Josh Hader is going to do that this year and be the one inning
where
closer.
They say that right now.
Yeah, but I think you can't do that, and don't be like A-Rod, as they said. Don't yell anything when an opposing fielder is trying to catch the ball.
Right. That I feel like I'm okay with that unwritten rule.
Yeah.
There's something. It's just like that.
I got it.
To me, unwritten rules should be about protecting against bush league behavior. Like, to me, yelling something at an opposing fielder when he's trying to catch the ball is bush league. Like, you just don't do it. Like, the same way, like, even like a fan base that was yelling, "I got it," would be looked at badly.
So that's better than the hidden ball trick. Worse than the hidden ball trick. The hidden ball trick is okay.
The hidden ball trick is okay, I feel like, because the hidden ball trick requires such a level of setup that it's virtually impossible for any major league player to ever actually be picked off on it. Because the thing that, just for everybody, that if you've watched the baseball movies where they love the hidden ball trick, that is like their favorite thing. The thing that you see in all those hidden ball tricks that isn't realistic is not only is the pitcher on the mound, he's like usually engaged with the rubber. If he doesn't have possession of the ball, he's literally not even allowed to be on the mound. So it is impossible for it to work, because every batter has been basically trained to, once the pitcher is on the mound, then you can step away. So you would have to get a guy that somehow forgets that while the pitcher walks and disengages from the mound completely and then wanders. It's just never going to happen.
I don't know when the last hidden ball trick worked in the major leagues. Actually, I have to look that up, because
it's
happened.
decades.
You think? I think it might be more recent than that. Guys can get fooled.
Now I got to see.
Here's another one. Then while you're looking for that, so the center fielder should go for any ball he can get to, right? So your center fielder is your best outfielder, and that the other guys are supposed to stand there. Like if he's running into left center field all the way toward, like, he can get it, the left fielder is supposed to yield.
Right. Again, to me, that feels a little bit more like it's the don't make the first out and the third out at third base. That seems more like game related than.
I think it depends on who your left fielder and your right fielder is. If it's Jose Canseco, you definitely want your center fielder catching the ball, and probably Jose staying away from it as much as he can. So, I think that plays a big part of it. And here's the last one that Anthony wrote, which was for adult fans: if you catch a foul ball, give it to a nearby kid.
That's not a hidden rule. That should just be a rule.
Unwritten rule, right?
That should
be a decent human.
Just be a decent human. Give the ball to the kid. That looks like the last one was in 2013.
I'm surprised it was even that long ago, but it's probably more recent than you thought.
Right. There were three in 20. There were a couple attempts in 2013. The Rockies and Tampa tried it, got it, and then the Padres attempted it. Then in 2000,
wasn't Todd Helton involved in that play? I think
yes, he was.
Yeah, I think I have some recollection of that. And he did like a
He
fake throw. He fake throw to the pitcher, and then
and he got him as he was getting up from the base.
Right. He didn't see it, the fake throw, so he just assumed the ball went back to the pitcher, and he was on the ground.
Which is not what people traditionally think of as the hidden ball trick. The hidden ball trick is about getting the guy to like walk off the bag completely because they've completely fooled him into thinking the guy's getting ready to throw the next pitch.
Do you think when Helton did that, he fakes the throw, and then the pitcher's got to go in his glove like that, so that the ball sounds like the ball went into his glove. So even like from an oral standpoint, he kind of heard it.
Right. Well, now I'm just sort of imagining like we had. I mean, this is where my mind goes just at talking about that because that feels really Looney Tunes. It's like, when are we gonna get like a Space Jam for baseball where we could have Bugs Bunny throwing the pitches and stuff? Because those old Bugs Bunny cartoons were great for baseball, and I'm sure they could do something very clever for that nowadays. And all of his stuff would be very against both the written and unwritten rules of baseball
and politically incorrect.
Oh, very.
Bugs Bunny was the epitome of political incorrectness at the time. So I think the stealing of the signs thing is something that maybe we should do another podcast on and more. More
what else is there to talk about with that? We've talked about it multiple times.
Well, I think it's just a question of how all the incidences over the years and how they impacted actual or might have impact, because you don't really know for sure.
I don't know. I feel like I'm ready to put the sign stealing thing to bed. I'm just done talking about it. And with the new rules to put into place, not the unwritten runs, I don't think we're going to be stealing any more sign stealing.
I think the pitch clock probably affects that. It's a really interesting thing to think about, right? That it's going to be that much harder to do it. And then this year we've even got less time with runners on base with 18 seconds instead of 20 this year.
And with an 8-second delay, you're not ever relaying that info.
I can't really understand what was 2 seconds with guys on base going to do, and that we had to add on to that and do it was so good, let's take more, because those extra 2 seconds are really going to mean something at the end of the season. So I guess we'll just talk about other things other than sign stealing, but there's going to probably be some other unwritten rules that we'll dispel in the coming seasons.